Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Tell you a story, Master Harry? It's about Dora the beauty just like an angel. It's better than any printed stories I've seen. Excuse me for a minute, sir, if you don't mind sitting on this stool. That was Snowflake's stall, sir, in the old days, and Snowflake was little Dora's pony. My father was the stableman here, sir, before I was born, and I grew up in the stable, Master Harry, just like your old father grew up in the hall. This was in old Sir Markham's time, the old Sir Markham, whose picture hangs above the fireplace in the dining hall. The first time I saw Sir Markham was when I was about 4 years old. Sir Markham was a strange old fellow when he wanted to be. Since there had been a lot of fruit stolen from the orchard at that time, he thought he'd scare me a bit. So he shouted, "Hey, you boy! What right do you have in my park?" But I saw a sort of twinkle in his eye, so I knew he wasn't really angry, and I said, "Don't boys have a right to go where their fathers are?" He didn't say anything else to me then, but when he saw my father, he said, "That's a smart boy of yours, Jim," he said, "and when he's a bit older, you must have him up here to help." Well, sir, I got a bit older in time, and I came up here to help, and, except for a very short time, I've been here ever since. I was a boy of 14 when the things happened that make up the rest of my story. Sir Markham was about 60 years old, I would say, and Miss Dora, as I once read in a book, was sweet, very very, very sweet 17. I always had admiration for Miss Dora. They called her Darling Dora at the hall, and so did I, when nobody was listening. You see, when I was just a little boy, and she was not much bigger, she said to me one day, when I was a bit scolded, "Never mind, Jim," she said, "cheer up. You'll be a man of some sort one day." And I tell you, although I always had an idea like that, when she said it, I stood up a little straighter right away. If you believe in yourself, Master Harry, you can do a lot, but if someone else believes in you, there's nothing in the whole world that you can't do. My main job in the stable was taking care of Miss Dora's pony, Snowflake, Darling Dora's darling, as it was often called. Miss Dora rode a lot, and she rode very well. I usually had to follow her on the bay cob. She spent a lot of time around the stable, here and there, and we became very close friends. She was just an angel. She was someone who couldn't be spoiled by anyone's company, and who made other people wish they could be a bit like an angel, too. But I see you're getting a bit impatient, gentlemen, and I apologize for wandering a little in my story. Well, it was Christmas time, just like it might be now, and young Markham, who was your father, Master Harry, was home from Oxford for his holidays. Somehow, he often came home with young Markham during holiday times, and he and Miss Dora were very friendly with each other. It wasn't a very snowy Christmas that year, though there was plenty of frost, and the lake in the park was strong enough to hold the London coach and 4 horses without a crack. Young Markham, the captain, and Miss Dora did a lot of skating, and old Sir Markham invited a lot of friends to stay at the hall for Christmas to enjoy the fun. They said that Aunt Dorothy, whom Miss Dora was named after, had been scolding him for not giving Miss Dora any company and keeping her at the hall without anyone to socialize with. I suppose that's why Sir Markham was making a bit of an effort, as we usually didn't have much excitement at Christmas. Among the visitors from London was a real military officer, tall and broad as a scaffold pole. I didn't like him from the start. He thought he could bring his army rules into our stables, but he always had to wait the longest. But what made me really mad about him was his nasty, sneering attitude toward young Markham's friend, the captain. You see, sir, he was a real army captain, so I suppose he was a bit jealous of our young captain, who was better than him after all. I didn't see it at the time, of course, but I've thought many times since that it was a setup. A plan by Aunt Dorothy to bring the big soldier down on purpose for Miss Dora to fall in love with. But he was just a little bit too late. Well, gentlemen, I told you that I was just a youngster at the time, and even though old Sir Markham said I was very sharp, I must admit that I didn't quite understand what was happening. I noticed that the two captains kept out of each other's way, and that Miss Dora didn't come near the stables for 3 days, which was very unusual for her. One of the old servants at the hall told me that the officer had asked Sir Markham if he could court Miss Dora, and that Sir Markham had said he could. My old father was acting a bit strange at that time too. He kept asking me if I'd like to be a postboy or drive the London coach or something like that. He said, Jim, Miss Dora will marry someone one day, and maybe you'll have to find something else to do when Snowflake is gone. I said, well, if Miss Dora got married and went away, I think she'd take me with her to look after her horses, so I won't need to be a postboy or a coach driver. My father seemed pretty happy with that, but he said, if you ever want to go to Scotland, Jim, you go across the moor to the Burnley beaches. Then turn right at the Ambley Arms. 3 miles along, you'll find the Great North Road. And there you are. I didn't think much of this, even though Father kept saying something like that all day long. My father said to me, Jim, if you ever want to go to Scotland, you go across the moor to the Burnley beaches. Then turn right at the Ambley Arms. 3 miles along, you'll find the Great North Road. And there you are. I was a bit annoyed and said, I don't want to go to Scotland. Why do you keep bothering me about Burnley beaches and the Ambley Arms? He looked at me very seriously and said, Jim, you never know how useful a bit of information can be. Now, you'd better run over to the stables and check if everything is all right. I saw it was no use arguing, so off I went. As I got close to the stables, I saw there was a light there, which shouldn't have been on, so I ran back to tell my father. But to my surprise, all he said was, if you ever want to go to Scotland, Jim, it's across the moor to the Burnley beaches, off to the right by the Ambley Arms. 3 miles along, you'll find the Great North Road. And there you are. I thought maybe Father had been drinking a bit with the others, so I hurried back to the stables to see what was going on. When I got there, I went in quietly, and what did I see? Miss Dora was in Snowflake's stall, crying and hugging him like mad. She didn't notice me at all. I stood by the post over there, the one you were leaning against just now. Little Dora was crying as if her heart would break, trying to say goodbye. It's only a small word, but very often it's the hardest word in the world to say. To put it simply, this is what had happened. Sir Markham had told her she couldn't think of young Markham's college friend. because he was poor and had nothing but his smarts and learning to live on. The tall soldier had asked for her hand, and Sir Markham had promised her to him. It had broken her heart, so she had come down to this stable, where everyone loved her, to tell her troubles to her old friend, Snowflake. She buried her face in his white neck and wiped her tears on his mane. But before I could say anything, who should come in behind me but the young captain himself? He stood by me for a moment, not saying a word. He was very pale, and his eyes were burning with anger. At last, he said in a low, hoarse voice, "Jim, they want to marry darling Dora to the big soldier, and I want you to help me stop them." "Help you stop them?" I said. "Why? I'll stop them myself. I might not be very big, and maybe I couldn't reach his big, ugly face, but a stone would hit his head just as it did that giant in the Bible who David killed. I haven't practiced throwing things at old Sir Markham's apples for nothing. Well, sir, I don't need to say that we didn't actually fight anyone. Everything was planned out. It was about 70 miles to Scotland by road, and they had decided to start for Gretna Green as soon as the visitors went to bed. My father was in on it too. That's why he had been hinting to me all day and sent me to check on the light in the stable. My father was a clever old man. He knew better than to get involved himself. Sir Markham would have been furious if he had found out. But me, I was just a boy doing what I was told. So, following orders, I was waiting with the postchaise at Burnley Beeches at 11 o'clock. I'd been waiting for a while, and I started to worry they weren't coming. At last, I saw something white coming along, and in a minute, they were beside me. I'll never forget that night. Miss Dora fainted as soon as she got inside the carriage, and she looked to me as if she was dead. "For God's sake and for Dora's sake, drive for your life, Jim," said the young captain, and I drove as fast as I could. It was very dark and I couldn't see much, and I think it was raining, or maybe something else, because there was a lot of water in my eyes, so I couldn't see anything. Father had made sure the horses were in good shape, and they raced off like they knew they were carrying their beloved Dora from trouble to safety. I drove from Burnley Beeches, as I had been told, past the Ambley Arms, and 3 miles further, I found the Great North Road. You never know when a bit of information will come in handy. The road was pretty straight from there, and the only thing I was worried about was wearing out the horses before we reached the border. At 2 o'clock we stopped to rest, and the young captain gave me some advice. He said, "Don't go too fast. They won't be after us for an hour or two, if they come at all. I've given them something else to keep them busy first." Well, there's no need to drag out the story of our trip to Scotland. We got there safely, though we kept imagining we were being followed by highwaymen, ghosts, soldiers, and all sorts of things. But it was all in our minds. The young captain was smart. Before he left, he made a big hole in the ice in the middle of the lake and put his hat and Miss Dora's scarf, at the edge. They spent all of Christmas Day breaking up the ice and searching the lake instead of coming after us. The wedding took place in a blacksmith's shop, where the young captain married our dear Dora with me as her only witness. Poor Dora fainted again as soon as it was over, and the young captain turned red, like a hero in a story. I've never seen such a change in anyone. It seemed like he could do anything now that Miss Dora was all his own. You see, sir, you can't fight half as hard for yourself as you can if you have someone else to fight for. After the wedding, the captain stayed at the Blacksmith's Arms, where he wrote a long letter to old Sir Markham and one to your father, Master Harry, which he gave me to deliver. Old Sir Markham never forgave the young captain for running off with Miss Dora, and if it hadn't been for your father, Master Harry, I wouldn't have come back to the Hall. After that, they went abroad to some foreign place I never heard of, and after a while, people at the Hall lost track of them too. But I know your father, Master Harry, used to send them lots of things without Sir Markham knowing. Then came a letter with a black edge, saying our Dora had died of some foreign fever. After that, we never heard any more. Poor old Sir Markham started to break down soon after that. He was never the same man after Miss Dora left, and he stayed indoors all the time. Then we heard he was very sick, and everyone wished Miss Dora would come back to comfort him. At the end, he kept calling her name, Dora, Dora, in his fever. Nobody could answer him. Their hearts were too heavy for words. I remember that night as if it were yesterday, though it was 40 years ago, Master Harry, 10 years before you were born. It was Christmas Eve, and old Sir Markham was still calling for Miss Dora. I couldn't stand it any more, so I came here to sit by myself, you see, and wait out my feelings. I was sitting on that stool over there, thinking of old Sir Markham and our dear Dora, when I looked up, and there, as real as anything, I saw her standing in front of me. She didn't notice me but ran into Snowflake's stall, buried her pretty face in his neck, stroked his mane, and patted his sides. Then she laughed her silvery laugh, clapped her hands and called, home again at last. Happy, happy home. Jim, Jim, where's that lazy Jim? But before I could get up, she was gone. I rushed up to the hall as fast as I could, and I saw a bright light shining in old Sir Markham's bedroom. I don't know how I got up those stairs, but I heard Sir Markham cry out loudly, Dora, Dora, come at last. Darling Dora, darling. He never spoke again. She had taken him away.